Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, sending love to each and every one of you. Do hope you're doing really well and keeping lovely and warm because it's very cold out there. And talking about keeping warm, don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of cocoa if that's what you drink. Otherwise, coffee or tea, whatever your preferred beverage is, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight that you're really going to enjoy. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Arabella and I'm from Washington State and have lived in this exquisitely beautiful part of the world all of my life. I had an incredible encounter with a female Bigfoot in 2001, and in truth I never envisaged that I would ever share my story with anyone. You see, my husband and I are very private, discreet, unassuming people who hate and loathe the idea of ever having the spotlight focused on ourselves, and we are camera shy as well. We prefer to hide in the shadows, much like Bigfoot, and remain elusive and inconspicuous, but in an anonymous forum like this, I really felt I wanted to share my story with you and your listeners. I am desirous and eager for people to know that Bigfoot is indeed real, and that some of these hairy humanoids will drop anything to help us in a moment of need, and that certainly happened in my case. I believe that they really and truly are the guardians of the forest, and while I appreciate that they may be aggressive, violent and dangerous Bigfoot out there, I also know that the reverse is most certainly true. Well, that is my experience anyway. In the year 1990, I got married to my very cautious, assiduous and shrewd husband, Paul, whom I'd been dating for over 3 years before he finally popped the question to me. I was over the moon when he proposed to me because the first time that I met my husband, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I'm impulsive, capricious, impetuous and headstrong, but my fastidious and prudent husband treads very slowly and cautiously, so even his parents were absolutely amazed and perturbed that he'd asked me to marry him because he's so methodical and judicious, always slow when it comes to making any decisions, so his marriage proposal was indeed fast work for him. We moved into a beautiful home in Washington that was indicative of the Cape Cod-style architecture and was just so perfect for a newly married couple with really beautiful panoramic views and a really stunning front and back yard with the most pristine green turf and a scattering of impressive trees from ponderosa pines, cedars and spruces, including 2 gigantic imposing statuesque oak trees that really caught my eye because they're easily over 300 years old. My husband teases me tirelessly and tells me I fell passionately in love with the oak trees long before the house, and hand on heart, he's probably right. Soon after my husband and I were married, he bought a brand new addition to our home, a beautiful golden retriever we call Butterscotch. She was the cutest, fluffiest thing you've ever seen in your life, and she was like this ball of long, very luxurious strawberry blonde hair. Before long, Butterscotch became steadfastly loyal and staunchly committed to my husband, following him everywhere like a loyal, devoted companion or a guide dog for the blind, as he was so bonded and attached to Paul. Paul fortunately worked from home, and so Butterscotch would loaf around, lying at his feet like a very luxurious foot warmer. If he went to the shops, Butterscotch would pop into the back of the trunk and wait for him to complete his shopping. My husband is a child psychologist that sees children from all walks of life and backgrounds, some who come from wealthy homes and others impoverished, but all have one thing in common: they're exceedingly troubled, disturbed and unhinged. My husband began to introduce Butterscotch into these sessions to calm the kids down, and it worked like a dream. It all actually started quite by accident and was never premeditated or pre-planned on my husband's part. Butterscotch just insisted on joining the sessions, so my husband reluctantly agreed, as she'd paw at the door and whine unless she was let into the office. My husband insisted she just laid at his feet. Soon he began to notice and discern that the kids tended to open up much more easily and were able to articulate, express and showcase their feelings more when Butterscotch was around. They would stroke her long golden hair and ask my husband all about her. He would talk to them about Butterscotch, and while they stroked her, he would cautiously, slowly, but very easily ease his way forwards with questions, and the kids were so relaxed that instead of clamming up like a tight oyster shell, they spontaneously just talked. Some of the kids my husband sees have come from very abused backgrounds, or they've been traumatised by a dreadful event in their lives that has impacted them quite dramatically, and so it can be like extracting blood out of a stone at the best of times to get them to say anything. I think Butterscotch sensed that they were tormented kids and loved interacting with them and sensing that they needed her help. She loved and delighted in helping them heal. I really believed she sensed these kids needed love. She would always be thrilled to see them, and a little rambunctious and gregarious perhaps, joyfully thumping her tail with unrestrained enthusiasm and wiggling her body in delight, whilst regarding them through dark, cheerful eyes that would melt the hardest of hearts. I marvelled at how seamlessly she exhibited affection to these tortured and fearful souls. It seemed people were astounded at my husband's unique progress in getting through to these problematic kids at the best of times, but he believes emphatically that Butterscotch facilitated his success. One day Butterscotch began to behave very strangely in an abnormal, anomalous way. We noticed she kept pawing my husband's crotch over and over again and barking at it as if it was an unwanted stranger in our home that needed to leave at once. She would put the pad of her paw on his crotch area, retreat and bark at it, and then repeat the same action over and over again, as if she was trying to communicate something of grievous concern to her that really was worrying. This peculiar behaviour went on for an entire week and set Paul's nerves on edge, creating feelings of trepidation and apprehension. He sensed something was inherently wrong and was absolutely convinced that Butterscotch was trying to tell him something about his health. So he booked a consultation followed by tests with a local doctor, and we discovered my husband had prostate cancer. In short, thanks to Butterscotch's early detection of my husband's cancer, he was able to make a full recovery and is now cancer-free. It was an incredible miracle, given Paul had an aggressive form of cancer, so Butterscotch categorically saved my husband's life. On one occasion in 2003, Paul did some yard work and slipped in the backyard over a wet stone, breaking his ankle very badly in several places, and Butterscotch came running into the house and began to paw me urgently and bark. I proceeded to follow her and found my husband under a tree in agonising pain, in need of immediate medical attention. Once again, Butterscotch had come to his rescue. So the bond between my husband and Butterscotch was extraordinary. My husband would go the extra mile to buy her a fillet steak or cook her up some chicken breasts because he wanted to give back to the dog that had given him so much and, in a nutshell, saved his life. One day when we were having a delicious barbecue in our backyard with friends of ours, my friend's 4-year-old daughter suddenly fell into the pool. We never actually saw a thing as we were so distracted and caught off guard by our conversation. We hadn't even observed the toddler waddling off. But Butterscotch had seen everything and began to bark to warn us before she actually fell into the pool, but we weren't paying any attention. Paul was in our cellar at the time with his friend Keith discussing wines, so he never saw anything either. We were all alerted to the loud splash when Butterscotch dived into the pool and pulled the little girl out of the water with her jaws pulling the dress and dragging her out of the water. At first we thought Butterscotch was playing with a doll, until we realised with horror that it was actually my friend's kid. My friend went hysterical and furious with herself for not seeing her daughter waddling off to the water. You just have to lose focus for a moment, and accidents invariably happen. My friend was so thrilled with what Butterscotch had done that she bought him a week's supply of fillet steak to thank him for the rescue. One day in 1989, we noticed that Butterscotch seemed out of sorts and had been vomiting quite badly, and we were about to take her to the vet, but we found her lying dead in the bushes. It had been such a quick death. 1 minute she was throwing up, and the next minute she was dead. I mean, how does that happen? It naturally broke our hearts, and my husband was inconsolable and shattered. He was so cut up, but he barely said a word for an entire week. He looked so crushed and desolate without Butterscotch in his life. It was like he'd lost a part of himself, and the house lacked the gentle patter of Butterscotch's feet and the golden hair that flopped out of the floor lying next to him. We never did find out what killed her, because my husband refused to have his beautiful beloved dog cut up for an autopsy. We buried her in our garden and put up a little stone in her precious memory. It said, "Butterscotch, rest in peace, my precious treasured friend. You are missed and forever loved and esteemed." One day my husband and I decided to go for an implantation, as before his prostate cancer, some of his sperm was frozen for when we decided to start a family. And within a short period of time I was pregnant, and we were overjoyed and elated with the good news. As you can imagine, I was decorating a nursery which I decided to paint bright yellow with pretty sunflowers because I wasn't sure whether we were going to have a girl or a boy, and I didn't want to know either, so yellow was a safe option. My pregnancy was very difficult and turbulent because I suffered from terrible morning sickness every single day, and my feet would swell up so badly in the afternoons, and I became exceedingly tired. One morning a friend of mine popped over spontaneously for tea, and she commented on how sad and empty our house had become without Butterscotch. "You really should get another golden retriever," she told me. "You need some life back in this house of yours. It feels like a mausoleum in here. It's so deathly quiet and woefully depressing. Your house is lacking the exuberant energy it once had when Butterscotch was around." I would get a golden retriever, but Paul can't go through the pain of losing another animal. He's so cut up and distraught over losing Butterscotch. "That's so ridiculous," said my friend. "Would Paul rather not have had Butterscotch's presence in this house, so he could have avoided grieving her passing?" "Of course not," I said. "Butterscotch is the very best thing that happened to Paul. The dog saved his life. Well, there you are. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I promise you, never a truer word was ever spoken. He's missing out on the love of another dog that could potentially bring him so much joy because of the fear of it dying. It's an established fact, unfortunately, that dogs have shorter lives than we do, but not to have an animal for that reason is crazy. He's missing out on so much." "You know you're right," I said. "Of course I'm right. You should buy him a dog, and the moment he sees the pup, he won't be able to resist that bouncy ball of golden fluff and those dark eyes looking at him with such love. Golden retrievers make the cutest puppies. You've got to get him another one." "You know what? I'm going to get him another puppy." "Good. I'm glad to hear it," she said. So that was when I decided to research Butterscotch's family line and see if any of his descendants had had pups. And imagine my surprise when I discovered that there was one girl pup left that was from Butterscotch's family line. I mean, it didn't get better than that, and I was so excited and informed the breeder I'd be taking the last dog that they had left, which was a little girl. "But should you not see the puppy first?" she protested, "to be sure it's the one for you." "If it's related to Butterscotch, I'm taking it," I told her. We arranged for me to pick it up at 5:30 that afternoon. "I'm afraid I live off the beaten track," the woman told me, giving me her directions. "Make sure you don't take the wrong turning, because you could end up in the middle of nowhere." I proceeded to scroll down the directions, but the one thing about being pregnant is you seem to have a mind like a sieve and become ditzy and unmindful. It's almost like you're actively losing brain cells. It's an established fact that women become much more clumsy, imprudent, and infinitely more stupid. I had noticed during my pregnancy that I was increasingly bemused, forgetful, and absent-minded. I must confess, hand on heart, that I was doing some really idiotical and bird-brained things. I kid you not, when I came home from shopping at Walmart one day, I literally put my husband's new underwear in the refrigerator and the yogurts and cheese in my husband's underwear drawer. I remember Paul was very surprised and perturbed to find his underwear drawer loaded with strawberry yogurts, along with blue cheese and camembert, and it all smelt decidedly cheesy. I also became increasingly cloddish and butterfingered with everything, breaking things in an ungainly, bungling way, like dinner plates and glasses that literally slid out of my hands at random and shattered on the floor. And it happened over and over again. I wanted the new exciting addition to our family to be a great big marvellous surprise and bright star for Paul. I knew once I brought the puppy home that Paul would be smitten and beguiled by the sweet little thing. In my gut it seemed the right thing to do to get another golden retriever. Goodness, we needed the pitter-patter of soft paws running around our empty home that seemed devoid of any life. I remember it was about 4 o'clock when I told Paul I was visiting my friend Jane for coffee and a chat. "So late," he said, looking at me with a baffled, bemused expression on his face. "Should you not be resting so close to your delivery date, rather than gallivanting around this late in the afternoon, just to see your friend Jane? Are you not being a little reckless?" "Everything's fine," I told him. "It's just a quick chat, that's all. Jane needs my advice about something very important." "I think she should come here," said Paul. "Not the other way round. I think it's a bit selfish of her taking advantage of you like this, so close to your due date. I'm going, I said, and that's final. My husband watched me leave in my car with a rather solicitous look on his face. I could tell he wasn't very happy, but things would change when our new addition arrived, and I couldn't wait to see the smile on Paul's face when he first laid eyes on the adorable golden pup. In a trice, I was on my way, driving down one dirt road to another. The breeder was absolutely right. She did live in the middle of nowhere. Once I'd left the highway and driven over a long bridge, I found myself driving through an exquisite mountainous area where I passed sumptuous forests and tall alpine trees, rocky outcrops and large silvery lakes that glistened in the late afternoon sun. I remember after taking several turnings, my car suddenly stalled in the middle of the dirt road, and then it stopped completely. Of course, I remembered, I'd forgotten to fill up with petrol. It was the very first thing I'd meant to do leaving the house, and even my warning light had been showing. What was I thinking? Why was I so vague, dopey and disorientated? It seemed like I was always forgetting things and becoming a complete scatterbrain. I reached for my cell phone to call Paul to rescue me by bringing me some petrol. I knew he'd be telling me off for leaving the house so heavily pregnant and getting myself stranded like this. Still, I had to face his reproval since I had even forgotten the petrol. I felt embarrassed and really silly. I discovered to my horror that I couldn't get a cell phone reception or signal in the mountains, and I was now beginning to realise that I really was in a quandary and faced with a huge conundrum. I groaned. I now knew I needed to walk down some of those country roads to find my way to a main road so that I could flag someone down to give me a lift, or to see if I could finally get a cell phone signal somewhere else. I reluctantly locked my car door behind me and proceeded to walk, which wasn't easily being so heavily pregnant, as I was lumbering along like a huge hippo, staggering over the rocky roads. This was not going to be easy. Why on earth had I been so reckless? I began to become weary and tired, and I sat down under the shade of a large alder tree for the moment, just to take a breather. Suddenly I began to feel some twinges in my stomach, and then to my horror, my waters broke. Oh no, this couldn't be happening right now. I was a week early from my due date, but it seemed like my baby had other ideas in its mind, and it was all eager to be born. But why now, of all things? The twinges increased in intensity, and that was when I realised I couldn't walk any further. I noticed that I was surrounded by mountains, and I was in an open clearing on a grassy verge that was flanked by statuesque towering trees. If that wasn't bad enough, I noticed the sky had darkened and a pretty sunset had developed over the valley in exquisite golds, tangerines and oranges. Yes, it was magnificent, but hardly something I could appreciate when beginning to feel the sensations of further contractions, and they were increasingly more regular. I think all the walking had somehow made things happen so much faster for me. I began to feel defenceless and endangered because I was out here in the wild without a single solitary soul in sight to help me, and I felt very alone, assailable and afraid. Suddenly I saw something moving between the trees that looked like a dark, threatening, shadowy form, and I sensed that whatever it was watching me, and an overwhelming, panicking feeling of impending dread overcame me. My heart began to pump very fast. I was sweating profusely and breathing very heavily. I became very discomposed and alarmed. I sensed that there was a predator loitering around, and there was nothing I could do to escape should it launch a full-scale attack on me. Suddenly the shooting pain became very intense, and I actually began to scream loudly as I tried to remember the breathing techniques I'd learnt. The only way I can describe the pain to you was as if knives were stabbing my torso and tearing the skin apart. I began to feel these incredible cramps that were unlike anything that I've ever experienced before. They were appallingly painful. I almost felt as if I was going to die, and as if my stomach was about to burst open. It was the worst pain I have ever felt, and I doubled over in agony, clenching my stomach and holding on to a tree trunk for support. Suddenly I turned around, and standing behind me was this towering giant. This was all I needed. I was so shocked by what I was seeing and discerning that in that moment I forgot my pain just for a second. Yet once again my body was being disturbed and bombarded and immobilized by the violent punches jolting and pounding my stomach again, and once again I doubled over in pain, barely noticing the critter behind me. To my absolute astonishment and amazement, this female humanoid, covered in long flowing hair that looked like she was half human and half ape, began to assist me and actually help me. I realised she was female because she seemed to know what was happening to me and wanted to help. In that moment, the fear just dissipated because I knew I wasn't alone, and the creature was so kind that I knew I was in safe hands. She seemed to know exactly what she was doing. She patted the ground and pushed me down on my derriere and began to open and part my legs for me. She kept looking between my legs to see if she could see anything coming out. Every time I screamed, she patted my back several times for reassurance as she tried to encourage me. Finally, I felt the overwhelming sensation that I needed to push, and the critter became very excited and kept indicating by her actions that I needed to push further. It was so strange, but there was no language spoken between us, but I understood what she was saying perfectly. Once I began to push, I did feel a huge, monumental sense of relief, and it seemed like my baby was entering the birth canal very speedily. And when the critter saw the head, she began to chat away very excitedly and encouraging me to push even more. Her enthusiasm was very infectious. Finally, my baby was delivered, and the hairy humanoid broke the cord using a stone, and then she handed me my baby, and I do not know who was more thrilled, her or me. I watched in amazement as the critter began jumping up and down with such ecstatic delight. I held the baby for a moment, and it began to cry. I realised I'd delivered a beautiful baby girl, and then I delivered the placenta, which was much more painful than the birth itself, and the hairy humanoid offered it to me as if she thought I would eat it. But in my body language I told her categorically that I didn't want it. The critter put it to one side and took a piece of it off and began to eat it. It was like she was saying to me, "It's really good." I could tell she liked the taste of it. I tried to clean up my baby with my dress, but the critter pointed towards a stream and took my baby there for a quick wash and returned it to me completely cleaned up. We sat together for a long while, and the critter did not leave my side. She was very protective towards me and was desirous to keep me very safe. I studied her curiously, and I would say she was about 6 foot tall, 500 pounds and 2 foot wide, and was covered in pretty auburn hair. The creature had long arms, strong powerful legs, and was muscular. Her head was shaped like a dome, and she had very attractive oval face with very kind deep-set toffee-coloured eyes and a prominent wrinkled brow ridge, a flat nose and a thin mouth. She wasn't bad-looking, as odd as that sounds, and I thought she possessed the most gentle nature. I pointed to my baby and to her as I tried to ask her if she'd had any children of her own, because she seemed to know a lot about pregnancy. She collected 2 stones and pointed to the 2 stones, and I assumed she was saying that she'd had 2. And then she indicated that she had 1 girl and 1 boy. It was so strange how we could communicate so much without speaking each other's language, and before long I was talking away to her while I rocked my baby in my arms. Sometimes she would take my baby from me and rock her as well. I could see that she loved babies and was very maternal. She pointed to my baby and me, and I sensed she was saying, "She looks exactly like you." I checked for a signal on my cell phone that was in my pocket, but there was absolutely nothing. I began to feel very frustrated, because how on earth was I going to get out of here? Suddenly I heard the sound of a car, not too far away, and I could hear a woman's voice saying, "Hello, is anybody there?" The hairy humanoid indicated for me to go, and she walked behind me at a distance, moving from one tree to another. It seemed like she was hiding in the shadows, but checking on me to see if I was safe. Then I saw the woman ambling towards me, and she stopped short in amazement when she saw my baby and gasped. "You've just given birth," she gasped, "all on your own out here in the middle of nowhere, haven't you?" "That's right," I said, "I have." "Are you sure you're all right? Should I not call an ambulance?" "No," I assured her, "I'm absolutely fine." "I can't believe you gave birth out here all on your own. It must have been painful and scary." "Believe me, it was, but it could have been a lot worse," I assured her. "You're Arabella, is that right?" "Yes, I am." "Are you the breeder?" "I'm the breeder," she laughed. "I came to look for you because when I didn't get a response from you on your cell, I thought you must have taken the wrong turning. So I came to look for you. I saw your empty car, but you weren't there, and I imagined you were trying to get a signal on your cell phone and had wandered off. It's not the first time this has happened to one of my customers. Out here in the mountains, the signals are all blocked off, I'm afraid." "It's worse than taking the wrong turning," I said. I have to admit I ran out of petrol as well. I completely forgot to fill up my tank before I left. Oh, you're exactly like me, dear. When I was pregnant, my brain turned to jello, and I forgot absolutely everything, she laughed. The breeder took me back to her home to clean up and to have a shower and retrieve my puppy, and then dropped me off at my home with a new puppy and my baby. Luckily, her husband brought my car back for me, filled with petrol. Paul nearly passed out in shock when I arrived home with a golden ball of fluff that looked like Butterscotch when she was small, and of course my recently born baby girl. He described it as one of the weirdest and most wondrous days of his life. When I told my husband what had transpired and where I'd actually given birth in the middle of nowhere after my car ran out of petrol, and about my bizarre, outlandish encounter with a hairy humanoid, he couldn't make sense of my strange, incredulous story, or what on earth it was that I'd encountered, because there weren't many accounts in those days of Bigfoot. I know Bigfoot helped me deliver a healthy 7-pound, 2-ounce baby girl that I called Victoria because it was indeed a victorious delivery. I'm still so grateful she helped me, as being unchaperoned, delivering a baby in the middle of nowhere has got to be the most terrifying experience. She helped me to feel that I was not companionless, and that meant the world to me. I went on to have 2 more girls called Lucy and Julia. The golden retriever brought home for Paul was called Daisy, and she lived for 14 long years, and my husband adored her. Of course, she was a different personality to Butterscotch, but equally as lovable and special in her own way. So there you are. That's my story. Wow. Thank you so much, Arabella, for being brave enough to share the story, because I know that it was very hard for you to do so, given that you are a very private person. But I think everybody is going to be so appreciative that you shared the story. So thank you so much, and what an extraordinary story it is. Until next time, goodbye and good night.